Thank you all for being here. This is kind of a new role for me. I've never really interviewed somebody before about their book. We're going to try to keep it conversational. And I wanted to start it off with a story. It's really my honor to be having this conversation with Charlie, who's a great writer and has become a fast friend. And the way we met was not traditional. Danny mentioned the book Inhabited, and I found that, and this is through this book is how I met Charlie. And it's because former mayor Jim Spahar told my mom, like, you need to buy this book. Your son Jacob's a character in this book. And then my mom gave me the book, and I read this book, and I was like, this guy's been on my porch. I remember some of these conversations, and I remember this kind of weird guy like kibitzing in and listening to the conversation. And I kind of put that away. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I started a Facebook group called Grand Junction Mutual Aid. And Charlie started jumping on there and being more involved and offering aid, and reached out to me about kind of the strategy of doing a fundraiser for the Western Colorado Communities Foundation right at the beginning of the pandemic, probably the first week while we are all still in lockdown. And I was like, hey, I'm a character in your book, and yes, we should do this. And since then, we've really become fast friends. So as a unique way to do it. And I used to work a lot more with the homeless population than I do now, and I started a number of organizations. Um, but ultimately, it's kind of a whodunit. So I was really glad I wasn't the killer at the end of the book. I really appreciated that because I was in the early chapters and then I disappeared for a while. I was like, oh no, I'm going to be the killer at the end of it. So I appreciate not being the main suspect. One of the things that, I've read this book that we're here for tonight, Not So Far From Home. And one of the things that really stuck out with me was the haircuts that you do both here and in Minneapolis for the unhoused population. And it really stuck out with me. You said it's like one of the few times that they get to choose something that they want. And you go to the soup kitchen, you eat whatever's on your plate. You go to the shelter, you sleep in whatever bunk they tell you to sleep in, eat whatever's for dinner. But when you get a haircut with Charlie, he'll give you a mohawk or he'll get you ready for a job. And I just want you to speak a little bit about like your philosophy on doing these haircuts and the empowerment and stuff that you see in the barber chair.
Okay, we're going to start right in the middle of things.
Yeah.
But that just shows you we're here to have a conversation and not, follow a script. I didn't start out cutting hair for unhoused people. I started out in a preschool with little kids, and it was only as I was going through the book, I found the very first time haircutting occurred to me as something I could do was here in Grand Junction at the Catholic Outreach Day Center. And in those days, probably around 2010 or so, 2011, 2012, somewhere in there, people did cut each other's hair, but there was just a little vestibule where everybody walked in and out, and sometimes clippers were there, and sometimes they weren't, and sometimes they worked, and sometimes they didn't. And I realized I can do that. I know how to do that. And so it was just an impulse. It was kind of an extension of doing the other stuff I was doing as a volunteer, which was, monitoring showers so that people didn't spend 30 minutes in the shower while there was a line of 20 people waiting, cleaning toilets, that sort of thing. So I had been volunteering for some time and trying to find not just be a functionary in an organization, but be a human being in a place where people needed that human acknowledgement. And this book is really very much about how any of us can come to terms with homelessness in our communities, but also to any thing we consider a problem or a need in our communities, and how we can bring ourselves to it and get satisfaction and feeling of love and accomplishment. And so I didn't start out anywhere near that mindset. Honestly, I was just trying to be a do-gooder. But this book is a kind of a series of revelations, and haircutting in particular gives me something to do that is not offered unless I show up and do it. It doesn't exist as a service in most places. I'm not licensed as a barber. I'm a street barber. So if the health department came along, that would be maybe a problem. I don't know, but it is a form of contact with a human being that is multi-layered. That, as Jacob said, most people who are unhoused, they are poor. They don't have relationships. They don't have support. They don't have people asking them what they need or what they want. They have people telling them what they should do or what they shouldn't do, or what line to stand in. Um, and so it's a very beautiful kind of interaction that I get to have with all these people. If people deliver meals on wheels, if anybody here's done that, it's a similar kind of thing where you're not DoorDash. You're not coming just to put food on the step and take off. You're bringing food to somebody who's alone, who doesn't have contact or doesn't have support or needs some acknowledgement of their humanity. And so haircuts are a form of that kind of interaction. There's touching. A lot of people that I come in contact with don't have human touch, or they don't have wanted human touch. Um, they don't get to just nod off in a chair while somebody watches for them. Sometimes, I have a lot of people who fall asleep in the chair because they've been up all night. And this is the first moment of peace where they felt safe, where they can close their eyes. So, I'm not a religious guy, but it's kind of a holy thing. It's a sort of a ministerial thing that could go a million different directions. Because some people just want to get a haircut and go. But for the most part, people tell me their stories. They reveal things that, most people don't reveal, even to us in other settings. When you're on the bus or on the airplane, everybody's looking at their phone. They're not in conversation. So it's a beautiful relationship. And it is a way into having a whole different mindset in relation to homelessness and what that means. And it starts always with the person. We tend to think of it in terms of policy or in terms of housing or in terms of legality or in terms of income. And we think of solutions in those terms. But I think of it in terms of a relationship. Because in addition to not having shelter, a lot of these people don't have those relationships. They never had them, or they're broken, or they're sundered in some way. So I know I'm not really talking about haircuts exactly, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful to just ask somebody, okay, what would you like to do today? What are we going to do today? And they tell me, and sometimes they say, oh, just do whatever. But I have a rule that once they're in the chair, they don't leave until they are happy and I am satisfied. But if they're happy before I'm satisfied, I might try to get them to stay a little bit longer because I can see things maybe they don't see. So very often they just want to say, oh, whatever you think is best, or I don't want to take too much time. And I say, no, once you're in the chair, you're here. There's no appointments. There's no set length of time we're going to spend together. This is for you. So I'm going to stop there because this is supposed to be a conversation.
You're good.
But we're starting in the middle, so I reach into many different directions.
Well, and I think you kind of alluded to it a little bit about the next thing I wanted to talk about is the journey, the very personal journey, that at first you're reading it and you're like, oh, it's a book about homelessness. And then both you and one of your sources in it kind of point out that this book is as much about your journey and your journey towards understanding this issue and understanding the people experiencing it. Could you maybe speak a little bit about that journey and maybe the changes you've seen in yourself or the perceptions that you've had that have changed?
Yeah, and this is, in doing this book, I wrote it in real time over 15 years and did very little to change the trajectory of the stories. We just took some out and but did very little changing to what's in there. So if I didn't reflect on things at the time, I didn't go back and put them in as an author. So there are things even now, now that the book is done, now that I'm starting to think about, okay, what is this thing that's different than a series of things I did over 15 years? I'm thinking about it differently. So my mind uh, keeps changing and re-engaging with things. So when I started, I really started because I was interested in little kids as because I love little kids. We didn't have grandchildren at that time, and I was ready to be a grandfather, all that. Uh, so I started volunteering in a family shelter, not because it was a shelter necessarily, but because they had a preschool there, and they had childcare for the families that needed to do other things to get back into housing or to get jobs or to get their other problems solved. So the impulse was start with kids because kids who are fragile or they're experiencing trauma or they have an unsettled situation, if they can get a more stable situation, if they can get help, if they can get connected to better resources, that's going to help prevent homelessness. That's going to help prevent poverty or people falling into poverty if they have a better start. And then when I came to Grand Junction, there wasn't a place like that. There wasn't a family shelter like that with a preschool and all that. And so when I started volunteering at the day center, I wasn't really sure that I was committed to this other world of adults, of homeless people living rough, camping outside, adults, all the things there. I didn't really deal with that in the family shelter. I was dealing with the kids. And I thought, I don't want to just hand out toothbrushes and clean toilets if that's going to be the volunteer job or pack food in a bag. Um, I want I want to have that same kind of connection I was having with the kids. And the beautiful thing about outreach and about Grand Junction is that that was possible to do. There wasn't some institution saying, "Oh no, no, this is how we do it. You got to do it like this." And so many of our institutions don't deal with whoever they're dealing with as human beings, as individual people, and they don't. They're more about the rules and the structures and that sort of thing. Uh, so that was like a first change to say, okay, I'm not just doing little kids. That's all fun and great. I'm dealing with kind of the consequences of people who have trauma, who have broken families, who have experienced addiction or violence or whatever that has set them on a new course. But I was still kind of a do-gooder, and because I was a writer, and it was kind of the glory days of blogging, there was a certain, I don't want to plant any seeds in your minds when you read this, but I will say of myself, I think I was trying to raise people's consciousness about what I was seeing about what homelessness was really about and what people were really up against and what systems were helping and not helping. But there was also kind of a performative aspect because I was a writer and I was writing about it. And I wasn't sure I really had the right to do that. Nobody said I couldn't. Um, the institutions that I worked for never volunteered for, never told me, "Oh, don't do that." They encouraged me to do it. Uh, but when you're dealing with a vulnerable population, when you're dealing with people, whether it's a culture other than yours or whether I have more power or privilege than them, I had to be sensitive also how I talked about them and how I told their stories. And so I was maybe careful at one about what I said and how I did it. And I wasn't even sure I had permission all the time. So if I didn't know I had permission, I held back. Um, so I was not volunteering to write about it, but because I was writing about it, I just had a different relationship with people than when I said, I'm not there. I'm not a journalist. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm just a guy who shows up on Wednesday or Tuesday or Friday or whatever the day is, and I do what's needed. Um, and that sort of opened up then another layer of the relationship where I didn't have to try to be something or do something or produce something as a result, but just be present in the moment. And that's where really the haircuts sort of became a substitute for writing about it. Because I was still doing something that I felt was productive and constructive and had a purpose, but it was just different. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, that's perfect. One of the things I really stuck with me when I read it was the kind of like little micro stories that these people are able to share with you, but at times it almost seems like fragmented in the book. And then I was thinking, I was like, this is actually how you get people's stories. You know, they come by you, they share a little bit about their story, and they go take their shower, and then you run into them a week later, and you get a little more of a glimpse of their story. How, and you got into it a little bit, like, was there a bigger did you wrestle with bigger questions related to, like, should I write about this? I noticed some of the times you kind of obviously changed names, some of the times you just left people's names as initials. What was that internal, maybe get a little more into that internal battle? Do I have a right to write about this? Like, is there things you didn't write about and people's stories that you're like, this is too much, this is too personal, I'm going to leave this on the cutting room floor, so to speak? Um,
Yeah, I think it's about respect. Um, it's about respecting others and their boundaries. Um, for example, I never told someone's story unless they told it to me. I didn't I didn't stalk them like I stalked Jacob. And he was an inspiration. He's really not just the guy, but he was definitely the inspiration for that character. Um, but that was fiction, and I could make stuff up, and I was blending him with some other people, and so that was okay. But when I'm representing this as nonfiction, and when I'm representing this as reality in this book, um, one rule I had was if they didn't disclose it to me, I'm not going to disclose it to anyone else. And that's how you deal with your friends and their confidentiality and so on too. So that was one thing that I've hewed to. I also changed names back and forth, and over time, as people got more aware of what I was doing, and they knew I was a writer and they knew I was writing about it, um, I became a little bit more willing to use their names as long as it was okay with them. So there are some characters that Kelvin Gross is one of the people that runs through the book. And there was a few times I wrote about him early on where I didn't use his name, and then it got to be he was also kind of the basis for a character in Inhabited, and he and his wife and his extended family I got to know really well and be close to, and so now Calvin and Tracy are their pictures in the book and their names are in the book, but there's still things about their stories and about things that happened to them that I won't share, I haven't shared. Um, but what I found is, seeing people and showing them that they are seen makes them want to be seen by others, makes them willing to be seen by others. And not everybody, but there's there are ongoing stories where people come in and out, and sometimes they may change names, and some I change names on and go, who is that? I don't even remember who that is. But 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 the fragmentation or the seriality of it is as you said, it's how we go through life. Nobody sits down and tells you their whole story in one sitting, and if they did, you wouldn't want to talk to them anymore.
It brings me into one of the kind of reoccurring characters is a man that was a friend of mine. His name was Mark. He lived at this encampment called the Point that was right where the Colorado and Gunnison River came together. And in 2009, The police went into the camp and like slashed their tents, slashed their bike tires, smashed up their Oreos, and peed on their sleeping bags and all kinds of very grown up stuff. And the people in the camp reached out to me. Should we file a complaint? We had a whole meeting. We're like, man, this might just end up worse for you in the long run. Do you guys want to file this police complaint? And they did. But in the book, you covered kind of Mark's fall from grace. And Mark was one of those guys that was like helpful at the shelter. Yeah, I'll do extra chores. Do you need this swept up? Like, just very helpful, very friendly, very outgoing, very gregarious. And then he gets into some legal trouble. And I was impressed at how well you still maintained his humanity and you didn't like express like disappointment in the fact that he had committed this violent crime and was going to prison. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just accepting people how they come and watching people on their good days and their bad days, and finding that humanity in them even on their bad days.
That's really important because the one thing I really do not like to generalize at all about people who are in this situation because they are individuals, and seeing their being admitted into their lives and seeing what they experience helps me look at my own privilege and my own humanity and my own failures or shortcomings. And so Mark, I remember vividly, actually, I didn't know who Mark was. The first time he came into the day center, he walked in and everybody, was like, Mark, Mark, Mark. And they were all, saying hi to him and coming up to him. And I got, who is this guy? And it turned out he'd just gotten out of prison. He'd been in prison. He came in, but everybody clearly loved the guy. And as Jacob said, he was back. He was volunteering at Homeward Bound, at the outreach. He was doing some work, maybe with Royce Hurst, or just all kinds of volunteer stuff. And so then he was essentially the guy that helped break that whole thing that really changed how Grand Junction and the Grand Junction Police Department in particular dealt with the homeless population. It was a big turning point, and I write about that a bit in the book. And then when the Point got shut down, the Point is a really interesting thing all on its own. But when the Point, the camps on the Point were being eradicated, Mark was one of the people there who was doing. I didn't bring the whole book so I could find things, and I just pulled some tear sheets out and I'm dropping them all the time. So much for that plan. But Mark was there during the cleanup, and he was one of the last people to leave, after the cleanup. And I remember I was there, and I remember, he's quoted, the paper quoted him and all this stuff. And then a couple weeks later, Catholic Outreach has a volunteer recognition every year. They have a dinner, and Susan and I, my wife, who's here somewhere, Susan, she and I went to this, and Mark was one of the volunteers, and he dressed up and he had kind of a Hawaiian shirt on and everything, but you could tell he was kind of at the edge because he was, it was supporters and volunteers, and so I had him. Oh no, come on over to our table. So he was talking to the board members and different folks, and just a regular guy. And then a few weeks later, let's see, I think I can find this. So a few weeks later, after we're sitting at this table, his name pops up in the paper, and it was. I'm not used to holding a microphone and looking at my loose pages, so I will try to read it. But all of a sudden, there's a story in the paper about how a homeless person had attacked another guy with an axe at Whitman Park and hopped on a bicycle and taken off. And I think then he got into the river and tried to swim and get away. And it was just so unlike Mark and what we knew of him. And I never I never did see him or talk to him after that, so I don't know his side of the whole story. But it didn't fit with anything that any of us, who were around him really understood. And so I didn't try to explain it, but I had to accept it that it did happen. But I know there had to be more to it than what the story was. And everyone has more to the story than ever gets told. Um, and and so one of the things that I have learned from this process is, number one, never assume anything about anyone. Don't assume, because and there are times where in the writing of this you will see I made assumptions and was proven totally wrong, or totally turned around my point of view. And after your head gets turned around enough times, you start saying, "Hey, I got to stop. I got to stop assuming." Um, and so that was, that. And Mark was just one of many of those people that I have known over the years who have, and some are in the book, and some are not, and have happened since the book, where you think you're on one trajectory with them, and then something drastic happens and it flips it over. And and so I have to remind myself that also these folks have a lot that they're working on that I don't have to ever work on to get around in a day. And so that puts pressure and stress and other kinds of, things that make for life that we can't conceive, honestly. And I'm still reminded of that by the people I volunteer with, that um, you don't know, you're a good guy, you have a good heart, but you still don't understand.
I like that you brought up the assumptions. There's one point in the book where you talk about a lady who's coming to the day center here in Grand Junction who sounds potentially like a paranoid schizophrenic, saying that she's on the witness protection program, and that these mobsters out of New York are after her, and everybody is kind of dismissing her as a paranoid schizophrenic. And then the day center gets a phone call from a guy named Tony, who's
Tony
like,
from New York.
Tony from New York, who's asking after her. And I've definitely had that experience rang really true with me. Um, I think one of the other things you do really well is just kind of the approaching everybody as individuals and as humans. And I think you even, you don't get to some like big grand answer of the solution to homelessness. Like you get into these different systemic failures and why this is continues to be a growing problem. But in the reading of the book, it really seems like the solution is as individualized as the people experiencing homelessness. Would you agree with that? Would you like to speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll tell a story that's in the book, and I'll read a little piece from it because I actually found it here. There was a guy named Carl Bartlett. I'll use his full name, who was in this community back, kind of in the middle part of this book, and it was before I started Inhabited. Before I started writing Inhabited, I'd finished my road. I was going to do another book, but I didn't have a novel in mind. I thought I was going to write about homelessness, but then I realized I don't want to get too much into the factual journalistic side of it. I want to still deal with it in an imaginative form. But before I made that decision, I was interviewing actually interviewing a number of people that were living in various, kinds of unhoused settings, and Carl was one of those people I was going to talk to, and we didn't connect until we were about ready to go back to Minnesota. And so I talked to him about, would you be willing to do this interview? He said, yeah. He said, but I don't think I'd be very good at being interviewed. Maybe I could just keep a journal or something and write down thoughts, um, and then give it to you. And I thought, wow, that's even what a gift. That's beautiful. Yeah, please. And I bought him a notebook, to so he could keep it. And I gave him my address and all this stuff. If you have any questions, contact me. So we didn't correspond, but I came back to town. And this is the piece I wrote when I got back to town. Last spring, Carl offered to keep a journal and share it with me to provide insight into his life away from the day center. I left a stamped envelope for him and wrote once to see how he was doing, but heard nothing back. When I finally saw him again, Carl ignored me. I let it slide for a few weeks until it became clear he was uncomfortable with reconnecting. I didn't want the awkwardness to continue, so I sought him out and asked if he remembered me. I remember you, he said coldly, but you don't know me and I don't know you. But doing the journal was your idea, I stammered. I was caught off guard. I appreciated your offer very much. You're some writer writing a book, and I don't know why I should tell you anything, he said. It's okay. You don't owe me anything. So while the response stung, Carl gave me something of value, a reminder that for all my desire to be an ally, it's his life being examined, not mine. I do not know him, not in the terms that really matter, and I have something to gain from his help. Volunteering grants me access to this building, but not to anyone's interior spaces. This is the first time I've become fully conscious of my privilege and how casually, though gratefully, I overstepped. I am the guest in his life, not the other way around. A month later, a volunteer who had hired Carl to do some renovation of rental property shared with me what Carl had told him. Let's see if I can make the jump here. The prospect of recording his days in an empty journal had disheartened him rather than giving him purpose. So much empty time and repetition with little prospect of change. Shame overpowered his desire to help me. Once I understood his perspective, it was easy for us to reconnect. I sold him a spare bicycle for a good price, and the tension disappeared. Sometime after this, Carl left for Durango and we lost track of each other. Periodically, I asked locals if they knew his whereabouts. Internet searches turned up nothing for a long time, until I tried once more after deciding to include this story in this book. I found a photo and a caption in a 2022 Durango Herald story about the history of sanctioned camping in the area, and Carl appears in a photo identified as a leader at the rudimentary managed camp that was established in La Plata County starting in 2015. So he's out there somewhere, and I'm just happy to have known him, but he's gone, and I'm gone to him.
Yeah, I think that story also encapsulates a lot of what I find really interesting in the book is that there's these stories, they almost always have this like gem of wisdom or insight into the human condition that I find really refreshing. And one of the things I've always liked to do when I worked on the homeless issue a lot was getting people and decision makers to be in real contact with the homeless folks, not just getting a tour of the soup kitchen by the director of the soup kitchen, not just getting a tour of Homeward Bound by the director of Homeward Bound, but actually getting to know and meet people. What are, if not solutions, what ways do you think people can best kind of jump in and get involved and have these human connections that have edified you and edified me in our experiences? What's the best way people could jump in and help their neighbors and coworkers and friends that are experiencing homelessness and friends you don't know yet?
Yeah. So I'd like to acknowledge Scott in the back row. He's one of your Grand Junction Council members. Not all the elected officials are learning about homelessness the hard way. He's doing it the right way. the one thing I want to say about this book is it's not just about homelessness. It's about how do we, I think everybody in this room, I can say we and feel like I'm talking about a we instead of a bunch of different people. How do we affect the world for better with whatever time and attention and energy we have remaining to us? There was a time when I thought this book was going to have a happy ending. I was going to tie it up with a bow, and there was going to be this beautiful story, Scott, of, you know, the resource center turning into this wonderful success, and everything was going to be hunky dory, and people would be getting into housing and all this stuff, and of course, change doesn't happen quite that quickly or quite that neatly. But all of us, I think, in this room have a desire to do good. However you want to define it, to do something not just for yourself, but for other people. It doesn't have to be homelessness. Homelessness intersects with healthcare, with transportation, with food, with jobs, with housing, with broken relationships, with addiction, with families and children. So whatever interest you have, whatever passion you have, that relates to making a better world, a better society, a better just micro community, it does intersect with homelessness. But that doesn't mean you have to go to homeless camps, you know? So I guess what I'm hoping, one thing I'm hoping is that people can take from this example, and I do have a conclusion at the end that talks about volunteering in a more general way beyond just homelessness. To see that there are ways besides just marching, you know, on the March fundraising day, or licking envelopes, or cleaning toilets, or writing letters to the editor, that there are ways that you can incorporate service to others in your daily life or your weekly life. In my case, I give a day a week. There may be other times when I'm doing things as well, but I'm committed to a day a week, and I've been doing it for going on 16 years. It is possible to do that, to have joy. I never feel worse when I'm done at the end of the day than when I started. I can't say that I have saved anyone from homelessness, and I can't exactly say I've put an individual directly back into housing, but I've helped them. I've helped a lot of people along the way, or helped them to happiness or mental health or just getting through the afternoon. And all those things you can't do on Facebook, you can't do on TikTok, you can't do shaking your fist at the other guys that think differently than you. So as I go forward with this, I'm not abandoning homelessness, but I'm really thinking about, how do you do it in your community, where you live? How do you do good there? You know, Trump is going to be Trump, as horrible as it is. We have very little influence on what's going on in Washington compared to the influence we have where we live, where we have friends, where we have relationships, where we know where resources are, where we can meet people halfway and form relationships. And I have in my brain, and it's somewhere in the book, where this service is not about giving, it's about reciprocity. That it goes like this, it doesn't just go like this. That I get as much from the people that I deal with as I give. And so that, you know, in terms of a takeaway or thinking about this, I would encourage any of you to to not just think of it as a book about homelessness, but a book about how can I, as an artist, as a public servant, as an attorney, as a nurse, whatever it may be, how do my interests, my talent, and my access to resources intersect with a problem I can solve or I can help solve in my community. And the more of us that do that, because you need masses of people to make change. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. You've got to organize at some point. You've got to have people working together on a larger scale. But if anything happens from this book for you as readers, I hope it will begin to open some thoughts about, how what does this mean to me? Not, oh God, isn't he great? No, that's not what this is about. It's about trying to show an example of somebody who got into it without really knowing what he was going to be doing, and just being curious and not being afraid and not making too many assumptions before you, or not being discouraged if he made assumptions and somebody pushed back on him, and learn from that pushback, learn from that contradiction of your assumptions. It's a great way to grow, and a great way to find happiness on a daily basis.
Yeah. Bring it down into the real world a little bit. I
Mhm.
was gonna, because the book is kind of half in Minneapolis and half in GJ, I wanted to just hear your thoughts on like, what do you think the differences are between the community, between the homeless population in both these communities, and how the community is addressing homelessness in both Minneapolis and here in Grand Junction?
I'm glad you asked that. Um, I've seen the evolution here in Grand Junction going back to 2009, when I really first started paying attention to what was going on. And Inhabited is sort of a, an envisioning of some things that could have happened or could happen in the world in relation to homelessness. Um, but I also think that comparing places, I have an answer for that, but the more times I say it, I just don't think it. I think the better question, not the better question, but the better answer is not, okay, in Minneapolis, it's urban, it's much more diverse. We've got Somalis and a big native population and African American population and bigger drug problems and more social services and more liberal politics. And here in Grand Junction, it's the opposite in many ways. I don't have to tell you what it's like here, but that's what Minneapolis is like. But then again, we're just talking about systems. We're talking about structures. We're talking about places instead of talking about people. And the better comparison, and I've just been thinking about this today, so I don't have a good answer exactly, but it comes back to the human beings that are in our community. And there is not a big difference between the human beings in this town and the human beings in that town, between the things they face and the things they face, and the reasons they got into the fix they're in and the reason they got in the fix they're in. There is hardly any difference at all. It's just different color of skin at different ages, different whatever. I've met people actually here in Grand Junction who have come from Minnesota, two different native people, as it turns out, who have been to Peace House, where I volunteer in Minneapolis, have been here in this community and have been here for several years. So it's, you know, yes, we look at the big encampments in Portland or San Francisco and whatever, and we see, oh, that's really different. And there are reasons, there are economic reasons and housing related reasons and cost of living things that's different. But when it comes down to the people, I don't see a big difference.
Was there an incident early on that precipitated his involvement in the homeless issue?
Um, I will say yes and no. The the one thing that happened was somebody that I knew as a blogger, who was also an active blogger and a cyclist, and I was an active cyclist. Uh, actually wrote a piece about coming across an encampment when he's riding on a trail. And he wrote about in having a negative attitude towards the people being out there in the woods. And then he began to interrogate that for himself, and he decided, well, I don't know anything about homeless people. Why am I judging them? And so he went down to People Serving People, this which is the name of the shelter that I volunteered at. He went down there and volunteered. I thought, God, he's a young guy. He's got a business. He's got 2 little kids. Um, and I'm retired and fat and happy. And if he can do that, why can't I? So he introduced me to People Serving People, and I was already interested in education and early childhood education, and I just connected those two, and that really got me started into the place. But I will say the other thing, and I've asked my son about this. I haven't written about it any place, but he's comfortable with me talking about it. Our son had addiction problems early on in his life that made his housing situations very unstable for a while. And it was a very difficult time for him, for us, for people that loved him. Um, and and so that I think that was another that I wouldn't say that was a direct, connection to this, but it certainly made me think about homelessness in a different way uh, than just, oh, here's a nice institution downtown that has a volunteer opening and I'm going to go apply for it. Um, I realized that there was a time in my life where I just couldn't do anything more for my kid. At that, there was a certain point at that where we couldn't do anything more for him. He had to do it for himself. But I realized somebody else was helping him. Somebody else was doing things for him. They were helping him, with addiction related things and health related things and all of that. So I thought, well, I could be one of those. It's uncomplicated by familial and parental roles and all that. I can be one of those people. So I would say those two things. One was the opportunity that sort of connected me specifically to homelessness, but the other one was to say there are beautiful people out in the world that are struggling. And I can't help them all.
It's really hard to educate the public about homelessness around here. I have pretty good luck on one-on-ones and talking about the different kinds of homeless people, all that sort of thing. I mean, are there any tactics that you've used or observed that work well with educating the public about what we're working with here, especially since the surge of homelessness since COVID?
Yeah.
Did everybody hear that question? Okay.
How do we talk to educate the public? Well, I wrote a book, which is one thing, and I've been writing about it for years, um, and I've failed beyond my wildest dreams to educate the public. So don't feel bad. But what I do believe is that it has to occur the way you're talking about it. That it is about connecting people to other people. It is not talking about capitalism or, housing first versus continuum of care or any of that stuff. It's really about connecting people of goodwill to people that they may not realize are also of goodwill. They're poor. They're poor. That's the main difference. They may have other stuff, but I'll tell you, there are housed drug addicts, there are housed mentally ill people, there are housed, criminals of all sorts. In, in big houses, not just in apartments or trailers. And so to get it out of the solution thing, not trying to address the solution first, but seeing the human beings for human beings. And that's why churches, I mean, I'm not, again, I'm not a particularly religious person, but some churches have been doing this for a long time. And they're doing it much more in that way rather than trying, ministering to individuals. Not try Now that's not going to solve the problem, but it will give people a door or a window to begin to see stuff that they don't see if they're watching Fox News or driving along the freeway and looking at, oh God, look at that encampment. um, I I will say, um, when the day center redid itself, got renovated and expanded, I learned that one of our county commissioners had never been there, so I got him down there. I learned that one of the city council members, who's no longer there, who seemed kind of clueless, had actually brought a homeless person into his house, uh, let him stay there. And the way I learned that is he showed up at the day center to see where the guy was because his wallet was missing. so anyway, it's not a straightforward path. It's not a straight path. But I think making that human connection is essential to this, because we're never going to solve it totally, and it's going to be hard and it's complicated. And if we're dealing at that level, it's the people who like complication and like policy and like 20-year horizons are going to be fine. But the people who have to pay for it, or the people who have to vote for it, or the people who have to not protest it, are not going to be fine in those kind of discussions. So that's my long, short answer.
I would echo that too. In 2009, I had helped with a number of activists and a number of homeless friends of mine. We started a group called Housing First, No More Debts that actively tried to organize the homeless folks to be a political voice for their own change, get homeless voices at these different coalition meetings and stuff. And we were really able to turn the heads of a couple conservative Republican city council members by inviting them to the soup kitchen, and not for a tour, but like, meet me in line. We're going to sit in line with everybody else. We're going to eat at a table with everybody else. And I really watched, and I really firmly believe, and maybe Stephania with Mutual Aid Partners can back this up, but when people have that contact as volunteers with this population, there is a change there. And I think churches do that a lot because it gets, the congregation face to face with people experiencing homelessness. So meeting them as humans, really might be the number one way to build compassion for this population. Is there any other questions?
I think it's great what you're doing. I really do. And I also think you're better religious because the word means to reconnect, to relocate.
Mhm.
And it has no quote unquote religious connotation. It's a person to person.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
I was just wondering, the ministry in Montrose at one of the churches, they got charged with helping the homeless. That is so ridiculous. What's your opinion?
So the comment was about the church in Montrose that has had trouble with the city because they have sheltered or enabled people to camp on their property. If you look at the history of homelessness in America, we have cycled. It was present, back in day one. The colonies, before we were even an independent country, homelessness and unhoused people and the poor were a big issue in colonial city governments. That was one of the main reasons that they taxed people, was to have poorhouses or to have some way of dealing with poverty in their midst. But there's always a cycle. So the government tries something, and then pretty soon people say, hey, we can make money off this. If I run the poorhouse, or if I supply the meat or the gruel, and so then a commercial interest comes in, and then that doesn't work. And so then they go, well, the churches, it's for the churches to do. And then the churches come in, and they say, well, we can't do all that. And then the rich people come in, and they say, oh, well, we'll fix it. We have lots of money, and our wives need stuff to do, so we'll send them and educate and elevate the pop. And it just continues to cycle that way. So right now we are in a as a country, every community may be different, but as a country now, we're saying, okay, we tried that liberal crap, right? We tried social services and all that. Now we're gonna pack people up and send the brown ones out of the country, and we are gonna harass every encampment or every place people settle down to make sure they don't bother the nice people. Um, and that's kind of the mode that we're in that difficult period right now where we're trying to say, are we going to tilt further into this more authoritarian police state kind of approach to poverty? Um, and and I think part of it is people, again, I want to say, calling people homeless. I say homeless because people know what we're talking about, but I don't like people experiencing homelessness. It's poverty. It is poverty. It is people. If people have enough money, either because they can work or they've inherited it or whatever, they can do a lot of things that the so-called homeless can't do for various reasons. So once we start talking about homelessness, then people have these mental categories of, oh, encampments, oh, drugs, oh, crazy people, you know. So I think it's, the conservatives aren't necessarily unkind or against homelessness. I don't want to imply that when I talk about what's happening in the country right now. Um, there are a lot of very kind and giving people that I don't agree with politically, and I and I think it's worthwhile to find those people and work together to change things. So I applaud what the church is doing. I think churches should be able to use their property uh, to minister the way they want to minister to the world, uh, to let people come into their churches, to let them, uh, whether it's an organized community, and there are some like that where people actually live, parishioners actually take little tiny houses and live on the property with the community. I think community. I'm good. I'm sorry. I'm looking at my timekeeper right there, but one of the things I think is really important is creating places and opportunities for community building. Peace House Community is the name of the place I volunteer in Minneapolis, and it is going on 35 years, 36 years in existence. It's in a very poor and so-called dangerous part of the city, very diverse population, um, and Peace House Community is essentially the living room for that part of the city. Anybody is welcome. Anybody can come in. It's the only place that I know of around the way that you don't have to sign in when you come in the door, that you don't have to show an ID card or whatever. We don't have an armed guard at the door. Um, it's a place where they can belong, and and as a result, we don't know who's homeless and who's not, and we don't care because that isn't why they're there. They need a place to belong. They need a place to find resources, uh, get a cup of coffee, get a sandwich, or get a meal at lunch. Um, some people are living in group homes. They're living in tents. They're camping under bridges. They may have apartments, but they identify still as poor and as part of this community. And um, and 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 that Mutual Aid Partners, I think, is one of those places that is encouraging that. A lot of the institutions here, I think, have a piece of that. But once you start concentrating, then the neighbors start, getting restless. So you can't just drop it into a neighborhood, or as our Grand Junction mayor discovered, you can't just drop a treatment program into a neighborhood without even talking to the neighborhood before you do it. As beautiful as maybe that impulse might have been, it's not going to work unless you work with the community and help the rest of the community see why this is going to be a positive place, what it's really doing inside, not what's happening on the outside, which is the problem with happened to the resource center.